Hey guys, what's up? It is your friendly neighborhood UberGoose here, back again with another Dota 2 video. This time we're going to be talking about Pudge, because I think that this hero has, to some degree, actually slipped through the cracks. He's received almost exclusively buffs since Dota 2 became a thing, and I think at this point we're at a point where it's about to boil over, and we're about to see a lot of Pudge in the pro scene. And I have a lot of reasons to, say that, and of course we'll be watching a replay of where Pudge was played in the pro scene by Team Secret in their match against Evil Geniuses at the DreamHack Major. So there will be spoilers for that series, but whatever. I mean, the tournament's over. You probably already heard who won, but in case you haven't, I will attempt not to spoil. So first things first, I have the wiki page open, and then of course I have Dota Buff open, and this is so we can actually talk about some of these stats before we actually jump into the replay. So the first stat that I want to talk about is the armor. Pudge starts with -1 armor base. However, his base agi is 14. This means at level 1 he has a little bit over 1 armor. If this was the previous patch, then he would have exactly 1. But now he has slightly over 1, but simultaneously armor is similarly weaker to the amount of extra you gain, so it's pretty much the same as before. I'm sure mathematically that's not entirely correct, but I would say within 10% of before. 1.33 is still pretty low armor, especially for a melee hero, and especially for a hero who is going to hurt himself at level 1 especially. So it is worth noting that he does have a pretty substantial problem with early game defensive capabilities. He's very, very weak in early game as far as getting hit and not dying. Although he does have pretty high base health because his base strength is very high. In fact, it might be one of the top in the game. It is right there. And he's tied with a whole bunch of other people. Lots of 25s. There's 7 of them. Which is pretty high. And then as far as strength growth is concerned, he is actually the 4th highest. Well, 3rd tied with Doom. The only heroes with higher are Treant with only 0.1 higher, and then Centaur Warrunner with 4.3, which, of course, is quite a lot more. Base damage is totally fine at level 1. He starts with, 55 damage average, which is definitely fine. One of the biggest buffs to Pudge, in my opinion, is the normalization of the regen values, because before Pudge had a pretty low mana regen and a pretty low health regen, and now I think his health regen is somewhere around the same as before. I'm not certain about that, but I can tell you his mana regen is definitely higher than before. Before he would have cleanly under 1.0 mana regen, but actually now at level 1 he has, I think, a little bit higher, right? 28%? Yeah, he has to. So he actually has like 1.1, 1.2, somewhere in that range of mana regen, which is quite a bit more. He also has a very high turn rate compared to pretty much everybody else. I mean, if we pop that open, we can see where everybody falls down when Gamepedia loads. First of all, I just want to say I love Gamepedia, but they got to figure out their host situation. Get on it, Curse. Because they're being really slow since 707, I've noticed. So Pudge is right in here. He's in this grouping at 0.7, which admittedly is closer to the slowest turn rate than the highest. However, as far as compared to the average turn rate, he is above average. As you can see, the vast majority of the heroes fall into 0.5 or 0.6, and Pudge is, of course, 0.7. So it's a pretty good turn rate, which is obviously a huge boon because he has Hook. And then movement speed is pretty low. Definitely one of the things you want to try and solve on this hero. But for the most part, his starting stats are solid. As far as stat gains are concerned, I did talk about his strength. Of course, his agi and int are both pretty bad. 14 base for both and 1.5 per level for both is pretty low. And he does definitely have problems in late game with physical damage, and of course potentially could run out of mana. However, there's an item that we'll be talking about that very easily resolves the mana issue in particular. Let's jump into the Dota buff, look at some trends and such. I think the biggest one, the one that's most incredible to look at, I mean, first of all, pick rate's obscene. Always has been, always will be. It's, I'm fairly certain, just the highest, and always has been. He's cleanly above 40%. He shows up in 40% of games. across all skill levels, which is crazy. What's even crazier is win rate. His is actually, despite being the #1 most popular, which I would have been able to say that with 100% certainty if I just looked up a little bit. Anyway, his win rate's actually really high despite being super popular. Normally, if a hero has a lot of popularity, they actually will have a comparably lower, like a relatively lower win rate, which is fairly common because a lot of people who don't really know how to play it are playing it and dragging down the win rate. But it is worth noting that that's not the case for Pudge. He actually has a very high win rate. 54% is quite high. In fact, I will pop open, I guess it's just heroes. If we just pop open heroes and look at trends and go current, when it finishes loading, we'll note that the highest current win rate is Zeus at 56.31%, and we can see Pudge, I don't even have to scroll down to see him, which is pretty crazy. They seem to not have any trend for him, which seems to, stayed exactly the same. Nobody is obviously trending super hard in any direction because there hasn't been a patch in a couple weeks. I actually don't remember when the very last patch came out, but I wouldn't be surprised to see another one coming out pretty soon. But let's talk about his talents. Oh, right, the point I was trying to make. If you look at his win rate, it actually, it peaks in 2K, right? Like, you see a very clear peak in 2K, and then it kind of drops for 3 and 4K, but then you can see that it goes even higher in 5K. 5K plus is his highest win rate at 58.02%. That is obscene. That's actually ridiculous. I don't know a hero who has higher. Tiny was around this point for 5K plus immediately after 707B when he became insane. But Pudge is just chilling, right? He's just sitting here. And I don't see anybody talking about him being insane, which is blowing my mind. As far as talents are concerned, they're very imbalanced. You can clearly see over 2%. The lowest win rate difference between two talents in a single tier is 2.3% for the level 10 talent, which is pretty wild. The spell, so basically rot damage, spell lifesteal, both insane. CDR does have a higher win rate. I think both are honestly fine. I just think a lot of people choose GPM because they think it's good, and then the game ends in the next 5 minutes and it didn't actually do anything at all. And I think that probably has something to do with the win rate being where it is, but I do think CDR is more generally useful. And then we have the Flesh Heap strength, which is you get 2 more strength per Flesh Heap stack, and that's a 4% higher win rate than Dismember duration, mostly because it's actually retroactive. And of course, 3-second Dismember duration doesn't matter much if you're getting interrupted before those 3 seconds go through. So with all that being said, we're going to pop into the replay now, so let's do it. And you see I have the draft open. I wanted to at least talk a little bit about the draft because Secret picked Pudge 3rd here. And I do want to comment on that. I want to talk a little bit about when you should draft Pudge, or rather when he could be a good hero to draft. There's nothing like super definitive about when you should draft Pudge. We're going to go 4 times. That'll be fine. So as you can see, EG picked up IO Tiny, which was fairly popular at this tournament despite not having super big success. I mean, it was of course very successful. There were a lot of teams who were doing it. Liquid and EG were 2 of the teams that really liked this combo. Makes a lot of sense. It's a very classic combo. Now Tiny's back in the metagame. May as well pair Tiny with Wisp, especially because most of these teams have really good Wisp players. In the case of Evil Geniuses, I mean, it's crit, I guess. I don't really know crit too terribly much for his IO, but yeah, alright. Then they pick up Wyvern, and you can see Secret went for Rubik Death Prophet. Death Prophet is just a solid hero right now. Rubik is, of course, a Yapzor hero. And then they actually tanked quite a long time to figure out their 3rd pick, which ended up being Pudge. And so briefly to talk about, you know what, actually we can let the draft zoom by. Let's only go 2 times, because I do want to talk a bit about this Pudge pick. So I think Pudge is great here, mostly because the IO Tiny Wyvern is actually fairly fragile. They have a lot of really strong potential to keep the Tiny alive and keep him as this like huge monstrous dude. And you know what? We're gonna go down to 1x at this point. They do have a lot of potential to protect the Tiny, but if one of them, or one of the 3 basically, gets hooked by Pudge, then the combo kind of falls apart instantaneously. It's only very strong when all 3 are available and ready to go. IO is a very easy hook target most of the time. Not because he like stands still for an extended period of time, but simply because his actual positioning is pretty standard. There's really not a lot of creativity when it comes to Io's positioning. You just want to be behind the guy you're tethered to, right? So it's pretty easy to predict where he's going to try and be, and if he tethers onto somebody, then you can kind of set up a prediction hook, and it's not too terribly hard to hit the Io. And if you do ever hook the Io, I mean, he's just dead, right? He's not a very tanky hero. He does just kind of fall over to damage, and Pudge, of course, starting the damage with a 360 pure damage nuke is a bit. On top of this, the Io Tiny Wyvern, this is already like fairly weak lanes. It's not super weak. Wyvern is a pretty good lane bully as long as she's not being pressured. And Io Tiny is, of course, a great combo for either a 2v1 in their favor or a 2v2 in a very standard sort of way against maybe a melee mid. However, I think Seeker drafted very intelligently with the Death Prophet, because Death Prophet plus Rubik can actually pretty easily contest the Io Tiny, I think. I would say in theory it would make sense, because Tiny starts with 0 armor. I think Io starts with fairly similar. I don't actually know. I can check as soon as we get into the game. But Death Prophet does a pretty hefty amount of physical damage at the start, so she can bully them pretty well. And then you have the 2v2, both range heroes, just to kind of contest, and it should theoretically go pretty well. And as long as you trade even in that lane, whenever the Pudge comes to rotate post level 2, he should theoretically be able to get a pretty easy kill, as long as he's not getting tossed back by the Tiny as soon as physically possible, or something to that effect. I also like the Timbersaw here in response to the Clockwork. The Clockwork is very clearly in response to the Pudge, I think. And is this... yeah, this is the part where I'm like, I disagree fully with this 5th pick, okay? I believe this is the most ridiculous 5th pick I've ever even seen in my entire life. And I'm not trying to say that Fear is a bad drafter and that EG have no idea what they're doing. I just have to say that I don't understand it. I'm sure they had an idea. I'm sure that they were convinced it was something, but I think this was just bad. And you'll see it. You'll see it, and I'm sure the gears will immediately begin to turn, and you'll understand why I think it's bad, and it definitely has something to do with the hero that we're talking about today. But the Clockwork is a very strong counterpick to Pudge. Of course, Pudge really wants to be able to actually channel Dismember on whoever he hooks. Clockwork being able to basically just not be a feasible target of the Pudge combo. Because if Pudge hooks Clock, then Clock theoretically can begin to battery assault. So the Pudge, as soon as he starts to dismember, will get interrupted, even, if he's dismembering the Clockwork. Now, they have similar cast points, and it will depend on the Pudge in particular. The Pudge could theoretically actually dismember the Clockwork before he can battery assault. It actually is like a fairly difficult skill thing, though, because the way it has to work is you need the hook cast to complete, and while they're being pulled back, you need to dismember them while simultaneously being kind of near where they're going to land. But you have to click them while they're zooming back to you at however fast that actual specific speed is. And it actually requires quite a bit of mouse accuracy, and I've definitely fucked it up a large number of times, and I wouldn't be surprised if pretty much every other Pudge player has fucked it up a large number of times, because it is hard. So you can see the Tinker. I think this is just a mistake. I mean, I know the outcome of the game, so it might look like hindsight, but I did call it. I think I tweeted about it, in fact. I think I said, quote, EG picked Tinker into Pudge, they got some balls, something like that. And that was before the game, happened. I just think Tinker is the wrong choice against Pudge. Pudge is a very good hero at yanking the Tinker out of a safe location. If you have Tinker wards out, anytime the Tinker is rearming, of course he's stationary for, I guess a second at level 3, but it's still stationary, and you can bet that he's probably going to cast another spell immediately after the rearm if he thinks he's safe, and you could easily hook him out of the trees if you have that Tinker ward. And that already is pretty good, and then you have Timbersaw also, who has similar benefits against Tinker, being able to cut down all the trees and easily chase the Tinker no matter where he's blinking to. And then I actually think Lone Druid doesn't really give a shit about Tinker, to be completely honest with you. But I think that's enough talk about the draft. I mean, I hope it is, because we're getting into the actual game here. We will be playing from the perspective, or we will be watching from the perspective of Puppy this entire time, so we can see specifically where his mouse goes. But really quickly, I do want to check on the Io's base armor. It is 0. Okay, so yeah, so both the Io and the Tiny have... Where's Tiny? Have 0 base armor, so a hero like Death Prophet, especially when combined with a Rubik, if they do end up duo laning, which they probably will. I mean, this is 63 average. Obviously, 49 average isn't a huge amount, but both have pretty decent attack ranges. Definitely can outrange the cleave and all that jazz. So, I think it's safe to say that the double ranged in this case is pretty good against the Io Tiny. So, here we go. Let's talk about what he started with real quick, what Puppy began the game with. He has a Windlace, Tangos, and of course the TP scroll that you start with. And obviously he spent other gold elsewhere, because this ends up only being 400 gold. So he still had quite a bit to spare. Bought some number of support items. I'm not certain what he actually bought specifically. He might have bought a ward, he might have bought a courier, he might have bought both. I actually wasn't really paying attention. And he did give one Tanga to his mid, as you probably should. Now, what I found interesting about this game in particular is they did play roaming Pudge, but the Pudge was still the 5, which is a bit different, right? It's a little bit different from the way that things have been going recently in pro games, where normally it's the 4 that roams, and then the 5 is like the lane support and tries to assist, you know, either mid or safe lane 99% of the time. Obviously, sometimes there will be like roaming duos where both supports will be roaming simultaneously, but that's kind of happening this game. But I just think that that's a very interesting take on it. So you can see Puppy started in the offlane, wanted to give some potential support, realized that, oh, my mid's probably fucked because, you know, Wyvern. Also, Tinker's mid, which is quite interesting here. They did put the Io Tiny in the bot lane, and then the Tinker in the mid with some early support from the Wyvern. And we see Puppy just kind of walks in, just strolls on in, went for a last hit. I think that's totally fine. Obviously, mid one was not actually ready and definitely couldn't have gotten the last hit. And then, of course, they give a nice little lift onto Fear, send it back, and of course, we can now talk about Rot. Also, I'll talk about level 1 skills. Always take Rot. Like, 99.99% of the time, take Rot. In the incredibly rare case that Hook is the proper level 1 skill to take, you will know it. You will see it. It will make perfect sense in the moment. But every other time, you just take Rot. So let's talk about Rot. It's a very powerful skill. Incredibly powerful. This little circle, well, that you can no longer see around Pudge. Oh yeah, there are pauses, huh? I don't know how long. I think the rest of them are fairly short. Come on. Every time I see something pop up in chat, I just want to, like, slow it down. Okay. So this circle here, this circle here is where Rot exists, right? And what Rot is effectively an aura. So everything in that area that is an enemy unit or Pudge himself will be affected by Rot, and Rot will deal damage over time and move slow. Simple as that. And the real strength of Rot is it's a slow. I mean, it's literally a permanent slow. Obviously, there's damage on top of it, and the damage does scale to pretty ridiculous levels as you put more points into it. But the real power of it is the fact that it has this permanent slow on a target. So especially when combined with somebody like Rubik, where you could theoretically lift them and throw them back behind the Pudge, they have to run through the Pudge, which is minimum 500 units of fart if the Pudge never moves a step. And of course, as long as the Pudge is moving, he can just keep it on them forever. Now here's a big change that they did to Hook that you'll see momentarily. I thought this was really cute. So Hook can now hook runes. Everybody's talking about using it to hook bounty runes. That's fair. Honestly, that's definitely fair. I think that's where most hooks are going to be used, is on bounty runes. However, you can do stuff like that for your mid, which is really cool. If you're roaming, right, and you're like, there's a rune here, you can just hook it like he did to get it slightly closer to the mid lane and in a safer location, which is really smart. And you don't actually expend anything to do this, because now when you hook a rune, it actually fully refunds the mana cost. Not the cooldown, but the mana cost. And that is an important distinction to make. Not sure what he was planning to do there. It was only a level 2 Pudge against a level 3 and a level 2 hero. Really had no chance to do anything there at all. But he is trying to make stuff happen. He is looking for opportunities on the map. I'm going to finish talking about abilities, and then we'll talk a bit more about items. You probably know what Hook is, but if you don't, I'll talk about it. It starts at 1,000 range, scales up to 1,300. He throws the hook, and the first unit, non-ancient unit specifically, that it connects with will get pulled to Pudge. And it'll take pure damage if it's an enemy. And of course, if it's an enemy, it will also interrupt unless they're BKB'd. It has a magical interrupt, like mini stun type thing. It's weird how it works, okay? That's all I'll say. Dota is a game of exceptions and weirdness, so if somebody's BKB'd and you hook them, you will pull them and you will deal damage, but you will not interrupt their TP for some fucking reason. It's just the way it is. And of course, the damage that it deals is pure, which is crazy, and it scales up to 360, which is very high. That damage does not depend on the range that you throw it. This allows you to have a lot of opportunities to just walk on top of somebody, fart on them a little bit, and then throw a point-blank hook to finish them off, because it's 360 pure damage, and you pretty much can't miss at point-blank unless you're like me. Which happens, you know. Then he has Flesh Heap for his third basic skill. It's not really, like, important. I mean, you never skill it early, ever. Smart Savage roll. So the reason that you don't skill it early ever, so what it does, I guess I'll briefly say, based on the skill level of it, you have extra magic resist, and this puts you up to 30-something% magic resist, like 30, is it 33 or 34? Somewhere in that range. Magic resist along with your base of 25 once this is level 4, and then you get strength bonus based on every hero that has died within 450 range of you, and it's fully retroactive. This means that if you kill 5 people before even skilling this, when you first skill it, you'll have 5 stacks. And it doesn't give a shit, and it's incredible. On top of that 450 range, if you get the last hit on an enemy hero within 1600 range, and I don't think this is mentioned anywhere, but it is on the wiki if you're curious. If you get the last hit on an enemy hero within 1600 units of you, and you're alive, then you will also get the Flesh Heap. You do not need to be in 450 range of that. Only 1600 range if you got the last hit. It's a weird thing, but it mostly exists so if you land a meat hook to get the kill, it'll count. But it also does work with Urn of Shadows and Spirit Vessel, so definitely keep that in mind. And then Dismember, it's just a 3-second channel. Locks them down for 3 seconds on heroes. It's 6 seconds on creeps. Sometimes use it on creeps. But it does magical damage, and then extra magical damage based on his strength, and everything about it scales, and it's very powerful. And it does pierce BKB, spell immunity. Very good hook. Very smart hook. He was basically reading Sumail, trying to look at his mannerisms, the specific ways that he was walking. He knew that he was not in vision, and set up a perfect hook. Unfortunately, nobody was really there to capitalize on it. Yapsor was coming in from the bottom, so Yapsor really just couldn't get there yet. And then mid one theoretically could have capitalized if instead of running up, Sumail ran back, but it was still a good hook. I think we're good on abilities. There's a lot of nuance to hook, which I think I will touch on at some point in this game, but it's really hard to actually articulate it. Honestly, the best way to get good at landing hook is just play a ridiculous amount of Pudge. It just kind of comes to you. It's a lot of observation, but there's also like some level of subconscious math to it. Like sometimes you'll take angles of walls that somebody is running near, and then the angle that you're going to throw the hook at, and then somehow combine that with their move speed and the hook speed, and all that sort of stuff needs to just kind of get jammed together. And a lot of it just comes down to feel. So getting a feel for it requires a lot of gameplay, but we will potentially talk about that later. For now, let's talk about items. So item-wise, you can see that he went on top of his starting Windlace and Tangos. He has gone pretty much straight for Tranquil Boots. This is very common for position 5 heroes in general, especially ones that don't really buy Arcane Boots, and Pudge is no different. Despite what I previously mentioned about his mana issues, he doesn't really buy Arcane Boots, and the reason he doesn't buy Arcane Boots is there's a much better item than Arcane Boots that you might be able to see on your screen right now that Pudge will always buy at this point. I think you should always buy it. But he did go for Tranquil Boots, and it does a lot of very positive stuff for Pudge. Obviously, this actually took a Windlace, so he did buy a bonus Windlace. One of the things I talked about was that Pudge has base move speed of 280, which is fairly slow, and that is the reason that you want these move speed type items, right? You want the Windlace, you want the Tranquil Boots. The Windlace will eventually get built into a different item. It'll eventually get built into a Spirit Vessel most of the time, and that already makes it worth buying early, right? So you can get that sort of value. It's 250 gold investment that you will eventually turn into the bigger item, but just having it for the 20 move speed early is very valuable. And having the Tranquil Boots is pretty much the same deal. It's move speed, it solves that issue. However, on top of that, Tranquil Boots also solves another issue, or helps solve. You can't really fully solve it, but it does help solve another issue of Pudge in that Rot damages himself. And Tranquil Boots, of course, as long as you haven't auto-attacked something in a while, which, if you're roaming ever, you will have long stretches of time where you're not auto-attacking anything, or being auto-attacked, where it will then just give you a tremendous amount of HP regen. Just a whole lot of it. As you can see, it gives 13 when it's active, which is pretty wild. Puppy is getting clockworked, which is a very Pudge type thing to occur. But Pudge does get just murdered sometimes. He doesn't look like he'd be a squishy 5. Like, he doesn't look like he'd be similar to a lion, for example. Somebody who's just normally prey. But he is. He has no way to actually create distance between himself and enemies. He only has a way to close distance. He has several ways to close distance, but no way to create. So when you compare him to somebody like Rubik, for example, he's actually very easy to pick off, despite being a strength hero and despite being this hulking mass of flesh. So yeah, I think I've talked about Tranquil Boots. That makes sense. Good hook onto Fear. The turn rates allowed that to occur, even though I believe, yeah, there is a ward. You can see on the minimap down at the bottom left, there actually is a red ward, an EG ward, right next to him. But because Fear was trying to move in on mid one, his camera wasn't pointed up, and as soon as presumably somebody called, Pudge above you or something, like Fear Watch Pudge or whatever the call out may be, whatever the specific wording was, somebody called that Pudge was there, or maybe Fear eventually noticed it, and Fear tried to react, but of course turn rates basically meant that he was fucked because of the specific angle that the hook was being thrown at. But let's talk about that next item that I alluded to, that I pointed out. It does exist on the screen somewhere. Admittedly, it's a recipe, but Soul Ring. Soul Ring is a tremendous Pudge item. It is incredible how good this item is for Pudge. It's always been good, but 707 made it better. So the big change that happened to Soul Ring is that now, with the build-up and everything, it gives... By the way, if you get a chance, you should watch how that kill in mid lane went down on mid one. Like, watch the VOD or something like that, or download the replay, whatever. Just watch that kill. It's like a 30-second kill, basically. And it's fucking wild. He basically survives, like, heart regen against 5 enemy heroes. It's wild. So anyway, Soul Ring. It got changed. The build-up got changed a little bit, and it no longer builds into anything. So instead, what it now gives is, instead of just some HP regen and some mana regen, and then the active, now it gives 6 strength and 2 HP regen, and then the active. And the active is slightly better than before, I think, right? Isn't it 25? It's 25 now. I think it was 30 before. I don't think anything else about it's different, though. But the real benefit for this is that it gives health regen. 2 HP regen is not nothing. And especially on a hero like Pudge, who has good base strength, good strength gain, and then of course it gives more strength also. And then he also has strength from Flesh Heap when you get into mid to late game. He gets a tremendous amount of regen out of this item, right? Like 2 turns into a very, very big number. I mean, in fairness, it probably only turns into like 4. But that still is significant, right? That's not something to ignore. On top of that, like I said, Pudge has mana issues, but he has very bursty mana issues, where he's not casting spells frequently. He's not like Skywrath Mage, right? Pudge casts, you know, his 2 spells back to back once every like 30 seconds to a minute until late game. And then in late game, like in team fights, obviously he's trying to cast more often, but most of the time there's these huge breaks between when he's going to be casting spells, and that gives him time to regen some mana, but on top of that, it also allows Soul Ring to come off cooldown. So he doesn't need a more permanent mana solution in most cases. However, it is worth mentioning that Soul Ring on Pudge actually can be one of those permanent mana solutions with the change to hook and allowing it to hook runes. This is actually something that I saw mentioned on Reddit a couple times, but doesn't seem to be a very popular conversation topic anywhere. It seems to be like mostly ignored, which is wild to me. So when you use Soul Ring and then throw Hook, it's consuming Soul Ring mana before the hook actually connects to anything. When the hook connects to a rune, it will give you the mana cost of the current level hook back. I think. I'm not actually, you know, I should test that, whether or not if you throw a level 3 hook and then skill it to 4, whether you'll gain 10 mana out of the exchange. I actually don't know. That's worth testing at the very least. It's not valuable, right? That piece of information isn't valuable, but it is information nonetheless. But here's the real important part of that situation, which you won't see Puppy do here. I don't think ever in this game. But when you do Soul Ring and then throw Hook and hit a rune, you will just net mana, right? You will have just gained mana. Because the way Soul Ring works is it'll give you temporary mana, right? And if the thing expires, if the 10 seconds is up at the end of Soul Ring and you have not spent 150 mana in that 10 seconds, it will remove the amount of mana that you haven't spent from your current mana pool. That means if you activate it, cast no spells, at the end you'll lose 150. If you activate it, cast 110 mana worth of spells, you'll lose 40 at the end. But when you spend that mana, or at least 140 of it, on hooking a rune and then net positive the 140 mana in a different way, you're actually just net positive mana. Right, you're turning 140 of the 150 temporary mana into permanent mana. And this is definitely something that you should try and work into your game if the opportunity arises. If you're ever like, oh, I'm low mana, but Soul Ring is up and runes are up. Soul Ring, hook a rune, you're good to go. Right, it'll basically fill your entire mana bar very quickly. It's great. I mean, it's awesome. Good hook on Fear, pretty much max range. So definitely keep that in mind. Now, on top of that, yeah, there's more. Believe it or not, there is more reason to the fact that this 755 gold item is actually the greatest shit since sliced bread on Pudge. This is the big one, in my opinion, and Puppy never does it, because it's very clear, based on this game, Puppy is not very practiced at Pudge. He probably doesn't play Pudge, and god damn it, that alliteration was so good, and I wish I could have kept it going. But Puppy is probably not a Pudge player. He doesn't play a lot of Pudge in Pro. So here's the thing. Rot does damage every 1/5 of a second. Every 0.2 seconds, Rot will tick. And that includes on Pudge, that includes on enemies, it's whatever, right? It's 5 times per second. This means that the longest duration between, ticks is, of course, 0.2 seconds. And what this means is if Pudge is rotting and is under 150 health, now keep in mind Soul Ring is non-lethal damage. If you have 1 health and you use Soul Ring, you will gain mana, the 150 mana, I think. I think it gives you the full mana, fairly certain. But you will not die, right? In that case, you've effectively printed temporary mana for free, and the government will probably be knocking on your door pretty soon to take you away. But this means that you can use Soul Ring under 150 health. It'll bring you to 1. And then at the latest, 0.2 seconds after hitting Soul Ring, you will die to rot. At the latest, 0.2 seconds later. Optimistically, it could be literally instant. In most cases, it will be functionally instant. People will not really be able to react, because the normal human reaction time, I believe, is actually longer than 0.2 seconds. At least visual. I think auditory might be slightly under, like 1 or 0.18 or something like that. So not only can they not really react to you, but also there's some variability with the actual specific timing of rot. This means that having Soul Ring off cooldown when you're being attacked by several enemy heroes pretty much guarantees a deny, right? Like 99% of the time, you'll get a deny off, unless they stun you from outside of 150 health, from like 250, and then all the way until you die, right? Like you're 250, you get stunned, and then you die before you're unstunned. That would be a way to stop you. Or if you're muted, like if somebody nullifies you, theoretically that would stop you. But even in any of those cases, as long as your rot is on, you still have a chance to deny yourself, right? So that's great. And being denied as a hero is a tremendous benefit. Good Tinker Ward. Is a tremendous benefit because you give nothing. When you get denied, when you suicide, you give nothing to the enemy team. You still lose gold, you still have to respawn. However, the enemy team gains 0. They gain no experience, they gain no gold, right? And you don't even lose your kill streak, which is kind of a negative. If you could suicide and lose the kill streak from suicide, that'd be pretty broken. So here you might see something kind of cool happen, I think that's what happens around here. It might be later. You know, I think it is later. Never mind. So yeah, basically what I'm trying to tell you guys is Soul Ring is bananas. This thing is so sick on Pudge. It's probably the best item he can buy. He's building until probably the second best item Pudge can buy right now, which is Spirit Vessel. Spirit Vessel is wild. I could probably go on a similar length of time talking about why Spirit Vessel is great for Pudge, similar to what I just did for Soul Ring, but the easiest way to like articulate that it is good for Pudge, I mean, I would theoretically read every paragraph in that active, but I don't think you need that. Just know it gives regen, it amplifies regen, and then when used on an enemy, it stops, like it reduces regen and healing on them while dealing damage. It's very good against Wyvern and Io, but it's also very good on Pudge, on a strength hero, a high strength hero, because gaining more regen and then amplifying that regen further is obviously going to be a very quick way to heal him up. And Urn is a very classic Pudge item, right? Urn has pretty much always been an item that Pudges have bought, and Spirit Vessel is just a natural progression. Very good hook. Using limited information, probably understanding that, you know, EG didn't know where Puppy was. He hasn't shown on a ward in a while. So using that information, he throws the hook along the tree line. So Crit would have, it is Crit on the IO, right? Yeah. Crit would have pretty much no time at all to react to the hook. And he was walking, you know, a straight line. Also, IO no longer has to turn to attack, but still has to turn to change directions, I think, right? Actually, he might not even need to turn for that. I actually am not certain. He still has a turn rate for the purpose of Force Staff and stuff. So I actually don't remember how exactly it interacts. Whatever. It was a good hook. It was a very good hook. Skill build wise, we can talk about that real quick. His first point in Flesh Heap went in at level 8. You do want the first point in Flesh Heap at either level 8 or 9. You do want Meat Hook maxed at 7. And so basically you want 3, 2, 0, 1, and then 4 at 7, and then you want your first point in Flesh Heap either at 8 or 9. And that's going to depend on how well you're doing. If you're already doing really well, yeah, put it in at 8. Sure, why not? If you're not doing too well, if you have like 2 Flesh Heap stacks, you can put it off to level 9 and get that slight bit of extra power with the 3rd level in Rot, sure. It honestly doesn't matter too terribly much. The difference between 3rd point in Rot, 1st point in Flesh Heap is fairly comparable, unless you are doing well. I think this is super smart. This is the thing I was talking about earlier. Very smart to go on Fear in particular, despite the Arteezy, right? Okay. I always forget who plays what, especially nowadays. It's so crazy nowadays how flexible every player is. Yeah, but of course Sumail is on Tinker. Sure, yeah. Okay. But I think it was very smart. So despite Arteezy being very out of position and a very free hook, the issue with going for Arteezy is that it's tiny, so you can't reasonably dismember the tiny and actually lock him down for a while. And on top of that, he's going to last longer than the Winter Wyvern in that lockdown, and theoretically could get relocated out by the IO much sooner, and you might not even get a kill from your hook. I mean, you'll get the IO, but they got the IO anyway. It was pretty free to get the IO anyway with the amount of heroes that they had there. So it was a matter of, you know, which non-IO hero can you get the kill on. Here, he could have suicided. It was free, 100% free. You saw it. He had Soul Ring off cooldown. He could have easily suicided. This is why I'm saying Puppy's not a Pudge player, right? See, he misses free suicides like that. If you're a Pudge player, you don't miss suicides, right? At least not free ones. You might miss suicides where, like, oh, 5 people are beating the shit out of me and they've stunned me. Yeah, all right, you're probably not going to get that suicide. But in that instance where he was under 150 life for at least half a second, which is way longer than enough time to get the suicide off. Like I said, every 0.2 seconds Rot ticks. So it was a free suicide that he fucked up. Fucking Puppy. So what was I on about? Right, so the hook on Fear was really smart because he was certain that Fear would die very quickly. So he killed Fear ASAP, and then of course EG did what EG was going to, you know, be expected to do as soon as the hook actually went through. And YapzOr just fucking styled on Universe here. It was incredible. Stop giving YapzOr Rubik. The dude it's imbalanced. It's not fair. He shouldn't be allowed it. So yeah, very smart hook. So as far as talents go, I did briefly talk about the talents when we were looking at the Dota buff win rates and trends and such, but of course he went Rot damage. That does put it up to 155 damage per second while it's activated at level 4. That is enormous. This means that it's a standard nuke of damage every 2 seconds with a permanent slow on top of it. Now, keep in mind Dismember will hold you for 3 seconds and do its own damage. So if you land a hook into Rot, into Dismember, whoever you've hooked is taking like more than like a Lina combo of damage. Maybe not. But they're taking a lot. Not a Pudge player. I told you. I'm telling you, he's not a Pudge player. He did play it in a pro game, and it did well, but, you know, it's very clear that Puppy needs to practice playing Pudge promptly. So yeah, Rot damage is great. There is a downside to taking Rod damage, though, and that is the fact that it does deal more damage to Pudge himself. You can see he was taking, he's also taking 155 per second, which is mitigated by your own magic resist base as well as extra magic resist from Flesh Heap, and theoretically you're going to want to go into a pipe at some point. At the very least a hood, and then eventually build it into a pipe, especially in a game where you're against Tinker. I actually don't think Puppy goes for a pipe this game, which is weird to me. Puppy playing Pudge, probably not practiced. How do I get to pipe from here? I don't know. Some wordsmith will figure it out. So yeah, Pudge he takes extra damage when you take that talent, which hurts. Definitely hurts. But he does get to mitigate it more than most other heroes do, simply from Flesh Heap, so that is pretty nice. Really not a good hook, though. Just not a good hook. Admittedly, it was kind of hard because Fear was right, like, on the cliff wall and flying, and actually figuring out where that hero's hitbox is in that specific sort of situation is actually fairly tough, right? Because he's already elevated, and then he's near, you know, a change in elevation, and he actually just went down it, and it's somewhat difficult to figure out exactly where he is. So I'll give Puppy a pass on that one. Give unpracticed Puppy Pudge a pass on that one. But it was still a bad hook. And you can see Sumail actually has... He has Ags? Wait, really? Jesus Christ, he's so rich. We're 28 minutes in, and let's go to net worth, huh? Yeah, okay, that actually makes sense. Honestly, I think that was a good hook. I think that was a very smart hook. Taking Roche. Committed Exorcism for it. Puppy is looking for potential kill here. Now, you're going to see something here. He actually could have easily gotten this, but he clicked. If you notice where he clicked, he actually clicked on the right side of the trees he was trying to run along. Barely, and that did send him on really just unfortunate pathing. He actually could have easily gotten a hook on one of those heroes. And if he did hook the Tiny, if he did hook Arteezy, there is a very real chance that Crit would have, before even seeing the rest of Secret, gone for a relocate out to save Arteezy, and then you would have gotten the IO kill, which is still fine. So I guess we can take a moment to talk about Hook. Despite it being like incredibly nuanced, and I did, you know, articulate that it is one of those things where you just want to practice, you just kind of got to get a feel for it, and spend a lot of time just throwing hooks. But one of the things that I will mention about actually landing hooks is you can abuse the infinite, like, walls, right? Pathing walls on the map, right? There's so many of them. Any tree line, any cliff, any structure is a wall to pathing. And you can abuse those, right? You can abuse those walls to more easily land hooks. Now, the ideal hook is where the two vectors, the vector that the guy you're trying to hook is walking on, and the vector of your hook, where they form an acute angle. That's the easiest hook to land. And the reason that's the easiest hook to land is because there is much more leeway. They're in the hook line much longer than if it were a perpendicular angle, right? Or even an obtuse angle. And if it's been a while since you've taken geometry, acute, I'm fairly certain, just means under 90 degrees. I mean, ideally you want it to be under 45 as well, which is definitely acute. And then obtuse is larger. So you want to get these like 45 degree or shallower hook angles. Now, you don't want it to be exactly in line, right? You don't want it to be on the exact same line 99% of the time. And the reason you don't want it to be the exact same line 99% of the time is because that means they probably see you, for one. And for two, it's much easier theoretically to get out of that line than if it's an acute angle, as long as there's any sort of pathing blockage nearby at all, right? And the reason that pathing blockage is relevant is because normally people will hug these walls, like you'll see Puppy doing right there when he rounded that corner, or like he's doing right now with these trees now. Like, it's very rare that somebody will make all of these wiggling motions while going through open ground, right? As long as there's a pathing wall like that, for example, right? That was inline, which is an example of a hook that I said you probably don't want to do. But it was okay in that instance because when he was throwing the hook, Universe was not quite in that line yet, and one of the sides was completely blocked off. But if you're in a complete open, like, hallway, if Universe was instead in the middle of the stairs, Puppy should not have thrown it in that line and would ideally be aiming off to one of Universe's sides, hoping the Universe would then try and juke and end up getting hooked anyway. Which is much less likely to happen, of course, when you have two different angles rather than one. And you can also use this to abuse hitboxes. I'm actually going to pop out of player perspective real quick, to try and show this a little bit better with my mouse. Where would be a good spot to look? There's a lot of good spots, in fairness. But we could look like this tree line, right? Because this So this is a great tree line, right? If somebody is running like up this way, if somebody's trying to run from here to get up here, they're going to hug this tree line pretty much automatically, right? Pathing will just take them along this tree line here. Now, if the Pudge is somewhere around here, right, where this range creep died, it is a free hook if the enemy is running up. Because Pudge just throws in there like this way, right, this diagonal, and it's an acute angle. It's this very shallow sort of thing. Both vectors are going to meet, theoretically, at some point. And the important thing to note is that because of turn rates, the only way to juke the hook is either before you walk into the location where the hook line is, before you would walk into the hook hitbox, stopping, which nobody does. Keep this in mind. Nobody does that, okay? It's a thing that I've, like, theorized that seems like it would be very good to do, but it's so hard to train yourself to just hit the S key to dodge a skill shot. So nobody does that. But then in Dota, you have to keep in mind that there are turn rates, which, of course, we did talk about Pudge having a fairly good turn rate, but everybody has a turn rate. And so once they react to the hook in a certain location, he actually should have waited out the Cold Embrace before beginning to dismember. It would have theoretically killed Sumail much easier. Sumail did die because Fada's a madman, but it would have been better. So you can abuse this. You can abuse all of these factors, right? The reaction time, the hitbox, and turn rate, all of these things. So when you create an acute angle where the other side, if you will, right? If we assume the line that the enemy is walking on to be an axis, if you were to then, I mean, that doesn't really make sense. They have a parallel line running against them, right? They're running parallel to the wall. I'm so bad at saying this, but you understand, I'm sure. If they're running parallel to the wall, and then you're by not the wall and create an acute angle with your hook, it's 99% of the time going to hit because of all of these factors. So that's a very good hook that you should try to go for in most cases. Is that actually not in the sentry range? That blows my mind. They're so close. They're right on the edge, I'm sure. So that's one big thing to keep in mind when you're playing Pudge. However, there is actually one similarly big thing that I think not enough people actually talk about on Pudge. One of the big criticisms that people always had for Pudge, especially in the pro scene, was, oh, in order to have impact as Pudge, you need to hit hooks. And that's not entirely false. Yes, you do need to hit hooks. It is one of your 4 skills, and you will probably need to hit it to do well. But that never stopped Mirana from doing well. Right? Because Mirana has arrow, and if she doesn't hit arrow, then yeah, she's going to be shit. But Mirana's just hit arrows then. So why can't Pudge be the same way? But on top of that, and I think slightly more importantly, the threat of hook is often as strong as hook itself. And in some cases can actually be stronger than hook itself. And that might sound wild, but if you've ever played Pudge, you will be very aware of the situation that occurs where you're rotating onto somebody from fog and you're at this like 600 to 700 unit range where you're clearly in a location, like in range of hook, right? They could easily get hooked here. So what they do is they dodge hook without you throwing it. They try and dodge your hook by juking left and right, being unpredictable. Now here's the issue. Juking left and right not only means that their pathway away from you is longer, right, because of all these turns. They're not going as the crow flies. They're zigging and zagging. But also they're wasting time because turn rate also is applied to that. So they're just wasting time trying to juke the hook. And then you just walk on top of them and fart. And then they just die because now you have a permanent slow on them and the only hook you need to hit is a point blank hook. This was just a really awkward engage. Puppy went in. Admittedly, he wasn't even certain that he was going in onto Clockwork, and then dismembered the Clockwork after he used Battery Assault. So it's just not a good initiate at all. So yeah, the threat of hook in some cases can actually be better than Hook. And on top of that, right, on top of the example I gave, you can also look at examples of people pushing high ground or defending high ground against Pudge. It's actually very difficult. Both cases are very difficult. Pudge is great for either pushing high ground or defending high ground because of the threat of Hook. He doesn't even have to theoretically land Hook, because if he does land Hook, they've automatically succeeded in whichever thing they're needing to do, whether it be defend or push high ground. Whether you're pushing or defending, if you've landed a Hook, you've succeeded in that goal, period. You know, because landing a Hook in either case means that you're pulling the enemy hero into your team to some capacity. Kind of like what just happened here, right? That's how Hook just works in those instances. Also, just pointing out, he has 45 health per second now with Tranquil Boots, Spirit Vessel. Wait, does it actually? Oh, it doesn't actually give health regen flat. I guess that makes sense. So he has Tranquil Boots, Hood, and Soul Ring, and then Magic Wand. I didn't really talk about Magic Wand, but Magic Wand is a great item for any support, position 5 in general, and especially good on a hero like Pudge. Right? It gives stats and it gives HP regen. What's not to like? And then I already talked about Hood. But yeah, so like in this instance here, where his team is pushing high ground, I mean, admittedly, you know, they have Exorcism and Bear, so it's pretty hard to fuck up this high ground push. But you can kind of get an idea of how good Pudge is at sieging high ground just by watching the positioning that his team and the enemy team takes during this push. Unfortunate Hook on the Bear. Definitely was not the goal. But you might notice something. The Bear's not here now. Bear was killing buildings. So, Mega Creeps. Good TP out though, very smart. It's very good heads up play. But it forces people into different positioning when having bad positioning can put you an extra 1,300 units into even worse positioning, right? So you're forced to be much safer, whether it be while you're sieging or while you're defending. You have to be much safer against the threat of Hook, which is very important. It's a very relevant thing. Briefly talk about level 15 talent. You're pretty much never auto-attacking. 75 damage is worthless. And 13% lifesteal is awesome. Dismember in 7.00, I think, got changed, so there was no more ags for Dismember. It actually might have been before then. Honestly, I don't know. Because 7.00 was over a year ago. Actually, just around a year ago. And that's crazy to think about, first of all. That has been like a year since 7.00. And it's also hard to remember shit from way back then. But there was a point in time where the Aghanim Scepter got changed, where it used to add strength scaling to Dismember. That was not innate on Dismember. And it would add the strength scaling both for damage and also you'd get healing, which is a pretty huge Aghanim Scepter, very powerful Aghanim Scepter. Then they changed it so Ags instead gave a 4-second Hook cooldown, but they liked the scaling on Dismember, so they put a much weaker amount of scaling onto it innately, which is pretty cool anyway. But the big thing is it heals you based on your strength, and then on top of that, when you get the spell Lifesteal, you get even more healing, right? You get this kind of double dipping effect into Dismember, which is really cool. So it basically means that when you Hook, Rot, Dismember somebody, you'll probably actually gain health despite the Rot hitting you for a lot of damage per second, which is pretty cool. So you can see Puppy went for, or at least is going for, a Lotus Orb here actually. I don't know if he finishes it before the game ends. Where's the fucking... He's going for a Lotus Orb. I think it's fine. I think he should have gone for a Pipe, but in fairness, he began to buy this item well before, well after the game was pretty much over. Also, he keeps dismembering Tiny. Like, I get it. He's there. He's next to you. Look at that. Another free Soul Ring tonight. I'm going to actually back this one up just so we can 100% double check that he could have actually denied himself. Watch this. I mean, if he's soul ringed, I'm not saying it was 100% free now, to be honest with you, now that I look at it. But he could have gotten it, right? He could have gotten it. He didn't even try, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I think he should have gone for pipe. But I guess, no wait, do they have a pipe, I guess? They do on Timber. Yeah, right, never mind then. Lotus Orb's fine. I'm not a huge fan of it, to be completely honest, but especially in this game, because the only real thing that he's cleansing is the blind from Tinker. Look at that replay bug. Good cosmetics on Ace. It really, in this game, is only cleansing the laser. And as far as reflecting skills, it's not super relevant here. It really doesn't do much this game, but I don't fault him for buying it, because the game was pretty much over. He just wanted that item that helps them push for the end as quickly as possible. And theoretically being able to cleanse the laser off of the bear so the bear can get more hits onto the ancient would end the game quicker, right? So it makes sense in that regard, but I still don't think it's super good. I think he could have alternatively... I still think a second pipe wouldn't even be bad. To be honest, having 2 pipes on your team is not even terrible. It's not great, but it's not even terrible. I don't know exactly how double pipe works. Because double mech doesn't work. But the buff that mech gives... Where's mech? So... it seems to not even, like, specify on the mech active how long it lasts. The active armor. But I think the active armor lasts, like, the cooldown or something, right? Isn't it something like that? I don't know. What I do know is that a second pipe isn't even completely worthless. I wouldn't have even hated to see an Aghanim Scepter. Force Staff would have been awesome. I think Force or Blink actually would have been a lot better. But honestly, it didn't matter by that point when he was deciding on what would go in that item slot. It really didn't matter too terribly much. The game was pretty much over. But I think it gave you... I think that game, despite it being clear that Puppy is not a Pudge player, and, you know, I think that it gave a good, like, sales pitch. I think that game really showed the potential for Pudge. I think he's a very strong hero right now. I think that's evident from his win rate especially. And I think not a lot of people are giving enough credit to his abnormally high win rate in 5K plus games. And I think he's just a really good pick. So I hope that video was informative. I hope it was enjoyable. Here's stats if you care. We can look at his item build real quick. I mean, obviously I talked about it pretty much every time he would buy a new item, but we can look at timings, I guess. One of the huge benefits, too, of going into Urn into Spirit Vessel is, like, the buildup is awesome. Urn's not even, like, a hard buildup, but the thing is, while you're doing the buildup for Urn, you can have raindrops. And one thing that I didn't figure out for embarrassingly long about raindrops is that you can just put them into your backpack when they're at 1 charge, so they don't get consumed. So when you want to build them into a new item, you still have them, and they're not consumed. Isn't that cool? Isn't that great? So you can do that with raindrops, and also they're just very good to have, you know, in that time frame. And then the windlace, like I said, he just bought a casual windlace, effectively a casual windlace at 5 minutes 44, which eventually went into a Spirit Vessel, you know, like 20 minutes later. But just having the 20 move speed on Windlace early is awesome, right? It's just super sick. So Pudge benefits a lot from all of the early item changes in general. The Soul Ring change is tremendous for him. The Urn of Shadows being built into Spirit Vessel is also tremendous for him. The Magic Wand change is super awesome for him. Like, all of these things that got changed in 707 are huge buffs to Pudge. And he was already in a really good spot, and he just keeps getting buffed, like, consistently. It's wild. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully, like I said, it was informative, maybe entertaining, maybe both. If you enjoyed, leave a like, do all that good shit, and I'll see you guys later. I don't know what the next hero is going to be. I do like doing these kind of videos, though. I think just kind of exploring the ideas of these lesser played heroes. Obviously, you know, saying Pudge is lesser played is not entirely accurate, but in the pro scene, he's very underrepresented. The most underrepresented hero relative to their pub popularity in the pro scene. So, you know, in some ways I'm right. And I think kind of exploring these heroes and maybe why they're not popular or why they're actually very good and probably should be popular is very interesting. And I think it's helpful to me, and hopefully it's helpful to you guys. And those dogs going nuts is definitely my cue. So thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.